the tech doesn't matter in a way, right? Like
Yeah.
we could have a cardboard box with a bunch of highly trained squirrels and crayons in it instead of a computer. If they could perform the same activities,
Yeah.
it wouldn't matter, right? As a black box. Like it's the functional abilities we're giving to the organization. And oh, guess what? The organization is made of people. So really, it's the functional abilities we're equipping these people to be able to take advantage of that matter.
Yeah.
And the technology is kind of a side.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Habitual Growth Podcast. I've got a very special guest here today, a gentleman I'm really interested in speaking to today because he has got 25 years of just being in the trenches of both public and private companies, anything from startups to Fortune 1000 companies, working with governments. Pretty much after our first conversation, realized you kind of do it all, Alex. And so I'm excited to speak with you today, but really what we're going to focus on is just getting through the noise of technology, bringing in what that can do to disrupt a culture. How do you make sure technology, when it's integrated, doesn't disrupt a culture? And just the importance of making sure that companies and organizations are future ready. So there's a lot to unpack just in that topic alone. I know there's things like prioritization, simplification, really how do you properly execute. But with that said, let's get you introduced to the audience. Tell us a little bit about you, Alex, who you are, and what do you do?
Yeah, no, thanks, Nathan. I'm glad to be here today. So great introduction. So I'd spent most of the last 25 years in a variety of roles all throughout the US and some international work as well. So started off in pure technology, and then pretty quickly you realize there aren't many technology problems that don't become people problems, frankly, or maybe we could call them people opportunities. I like that better,
I like
right?
that, yeah.
But this idea that intersection of people, process, tools, right? Cultures along the way, strategies along the way, organizations are along the way. It's hard to do much of anything with technology that doesn't involve touching people or people adjacent. That's why we use tools, right? So did pure technology for a number of years, entering engineering leadership, quickly segued into larger companies, public companies, some of the administrative activities around that, right? SEC filings, all that really fun stuff that you've got to do with big companies and how you lose inertia, right? We'll mock big companies sometimes for not moving quickly. There are reasons they can't, so it's the thing. Brief sidetrack at that point into mergers and acquisitions, right? Great way for big companies to grow is, well, you buy small companies who can grow. And how do you put companies together? And that honestly was one of my initial introductions to this idea of when you look at a business on paper, it's kind of this disembodied non-human thing, right? There's the name of a company and it's got X number of people and it does certain functions. But as soon as you try to put two companies together, stuff starts happening. All kinds of stuff, right? We've got all kinds of plans about how products will merge and people will merge and organizations will merge. And they often don't. They often don't.
I was going to say,
So
it all goes smooth, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Right up until first contact
Nothing
with
ever
reality.
happens, no issues.
Sure.
Yeah.
You just desired vision is on a piece of paper and we snap our fingers and enter that
That's
state, right? So number of years of that, and that kind of opened my eyes to this intersection of, I'd been a very kind of nose down tech guy. I was, straight computer engineering, software development, all that type of stuff. And realized at the end of the day, it's all meaningless without the human component, right? We cannot separate them, particularly if you want to do big things with big organizations. So earlier, before I went to university, so I played the cello. It was kind of part of my origin story actually started in music. So I wanted to be a musician. And I was fortunate enough to have insightful enough teachers to say, hey, maybe pick something else, right? And, it's like wanting to be a professional sports star. Okay, the top 1%, the top 0.5% will make it. And for everybody else, that's a great hobby. And why don't you keep it right there, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the level I was operating at. But there was a cellist named Pablo Casals, very famous cellist, mid-20th century. He was also a conductor. And he was rock climbing and crushed his hands in a rock climbing accident, like a boulder or something fell on his left hand, which is what you play with, and crushed it. And he's this renowned soloist. And his response was, thank God, something like, I'm paraphrasing, but something like, thank God I'll never have to play that instrument again. He can focus on the orchestra, right? So that transition from being that individual contributor to realizing that now our new role is playing multiple people and multiple organizations and the intersection of how everything they're doing flows together. You realize it's a completely different role, but it's actually a fantastic one, right? And that kind of segued into part two. Wound up moving to the West Coast, did a bunch of time in Silicon Valley, more focused on kind of product, fintech, healthcare, consulting in a number of different companies, and then wound up working with foreign governments along the way, right? Foreign startups and foreign businesses to think more like American businesses. So
Yeah.
kind of long way around of you start in this individually focused, really technologically encapsulated world, right? But as you strive to do bigger and more interesting things inside corporations, inside businesses, inside organizations, and realize as you're bringing them together, it's a lot more like conducting an orchestra, right? And you don't realize that when you begin your career that this is even a thing. But once those curtains got pulled back, that was something I really enjoyed doing.
It's fantastic. I absolutely love how you started that out. I love the orchestra example. I think that's a perfect
Yeah.
one. I'm really interested to get into more of the humanistic element of it
Uh-huh.
because, at Habitual Growth, like you and I were talking about offline in one of our previous conversations, we exist to get people started, but obviously
Right.
technology plays a big part in who we are, the clients' lives, and obviously with AI in the greater economic and political structure, there's a tremendous amount of technological change that is coming down the pipeline.
Uh-huh.
So I like that you said technology needs the humans just as much as humans depend on the technology. And I think
Uh-huh.
that's a really interesting distinction. But before we really dive into the specifics, what are some of the early experiences or challenges maybe when you were starting out your consulting career with shaping how you kind of approached technological integration into organizations?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question. I think in the early years, right, natural progression, a lot of people look at it as we're trying to do a thing. We're trying to build a thing, right?
Mhm.
So you look very simply at the end state of our organization does XYZ today. And tomorrow, we want an organization that does XY, but Z is going to be done differently. We want to have this new capability. We want to think about things differently. We want to move quicker or slower, more thoughtfully, less thoughtfully, whatever that might be. And you kind of create a transition plan about, okay, that's great. So in order to get there, we'll need to do these changes over time. We'll need to go build something over time. We'll need to deploy these things over time. We'll need to change the structure of these organizations over time. And then we'll get there, right? After going through that a couple of cycles or a couple of dozen cycles, honestly, you realize a couple of fundamental truths. Number one, where you think you will wind up is never where you wind up. Number two, what you wanted is probably not what you actually want. And number three, even if those first two were right, by the time you got to that arc of building technology, choosing technology, implementing technology, back to the people, right? It's people who use it. It's people who put data in, who get data out, or even if it's machines who put data in and data out, humans extract value at some point. They interact with it at some point. Did you bring the people along with you? Are the leaders of the organization telling the story right? Have the capabilities of the organization been changed? Is it meaningful to shareholders? Is it meaningful to customers? Is it meaningful, right? So it's this whole cloud of if it's a customer facing capability, do they know what happened? Do they know it's for them? Do they know it improves their lives? Do they know how to acquire it? Or do they appreciate acquiring it? Do they enjoy the experience? Are they able to be supported? All these concerns. If it's a business-focused capability, similar concerns. If it's a strictly internal capability, are all the parts of the organization trained? Are they on board? Do they have new abilities? Did they lose old abilities? Do they change the way that they're doing their daily work? Does this impact how many people? Does it do this? Does it do that? Does it do the other? And anytime you looked at any of those scenarios, right? Pure external product, internal product, hybrid products, people. That second ring, that third ring is people. And that learning process was going from being a young engineering leader who says, hey, we built the thing. Why isn't the world changed? To realizing, oh, wow, the changing the world part is almost independent from building the thing. Like building the thing supports changing the world, but changing the world is a people process that goes in parallel or separately. And then this building the thing is something that we do to support changing the world with people. So
Mm,
it was a painful moment as a technologist to kind of go, the tech doesn't matter in a way, right? Like
yeah,
we could have a cardboard box with a bunch of highly trained squirrels and crayons in it instead of a computer. If they could perform the same activities,
yeah,
it wouldn't matter, right? As a black box. Like it's the functional abilities we're giving to the organization. And oh, guess what? The organization is made of people. So really, it's the functional abilities we're equipping these people to be able to take advantage of that matter. And
yeah.
the technology is kind of a side, right?
Yeah, interesting. I've long wondered about this, and I love that you are positioned in this for the work that you do because we can peek a little bit being like under the hood. And I'm curious, is this a small business versus a large business? Is
Uh-huh.
this any size organization that kind of deals with this, just maybe at different magnitudes because of the size of the organization? And then the second part to the question, and this is the one I'm really interested in, is does technology almost become a default because it's quote unquote the easy solution, right? I don't have
Uh-huh.
to change the
Uh-huh.
culture. I don't have to develop the people. It's I can get more productivity or more product or more results because I'm bringing in something that just accelerates what we're already doing.
Yeah. So I'm gonna have to remember the part A, part B, part C of that question, right?
So
It's
I'll break
it's
those up
quite
next time.
it's quite a dive. So I think starting with the size,
Yeah.
yes, yes, and I think there's a couple of slices. You've got organizations that are inherently technology organizations. If you're an engineering organization who uh, designs computer chips, right, you're going to work in a very different way than an organization for whom technology is business support. So
Mm,
let's set those pure technology organizations aside for a moment. We have organizations that might be something like SaaS software companies, right? They sell software on the internet, sell a software product. One of the early pieces of advice I got, which was fantastic, which is build what you do and buy the rest. So if you have a unique differentiation, great startups often know a secret about the world that nobody else knows, right? Whatever that might be, how you do something, how you address it, how you interact with the market.
yeah.
Do that, right? You go build that. You go do that. That's core to your business. But all the rest of that stuff, you probably want to go buy. You don't want to go write your own email systems and go create your own, everything else. You want to go buy all that stuff. But in that case, you're still a tech company, right? So people might be more accustomed. They might have a better intuition for the technology, how the technology works, impacts their lives, et cetera. So maybe we group that into a second category. And then there's a third category, which is more broadly maybe it's a service or a non-technology business company. Maybe
Okay.
you're selling t-shirts, right? Maybe you're fulfilling logistics. You're doing something that's not related to tech, and you would approach that differently. So I think these three areas you would approach differently just because of the constituent makeup, once again, of the humans in the organization. An
Yeah.
organization that's 80% engineers, we're going to approach tech change differently than one that's 5% engineers or has no engineering function. They outsource engineering. They buy all their software. They might have some IT folks to implement things, but broadly, it's not a tech organization. So the approach is very different. Often with the one that is the non-tech organization, we're at an end of the spectrum where we might talk more about functional abilities, right? We might talk more about organizational abilities. And we might think about getting training and the human focused change management in place first to
Mhm.
really understand what's that's going to do. Whereas some of the tech focused organizations, they might have a little more latitude for rapid change or iterative change, right? We're going to make 20 little sequential changes in a row. And I think there is a couple vertical slices as well, right? So for profit companies are another one. So we've got those three categories. And then
Okay.
we can probably scale by size, right? Because even the non technology organizations above a certain size, they might have project management offices and change management offices and a built-in ability to do this.
Mhm.
Mid-sized companies, not so much. Small companies, very much not so much. So most of my consulting work is really in that kind of under 500 headcount space,
Okay.
right? Some of the jokes about there's two size companies, under 150, over 500 people.
Right.
Now, there's really nothing in the middle. It's awkward adolescence. So kind
Right.
of up to that adulthood phase. And then there's a for-profit, nonprofit component as well, right? So we might think about things differently also. So yeah, there are a number of striations, right? Maybe horizontal, vertically, and then how about horizontally at the same
Okay.
time,
Yeah. Makes sense. And then that second piece was
right?
when does technology become maybe that easy option
Right.
to, hey, I'm going to go integrate something new versus I really instead should be focusing on the people and the company
Yeah.
aspect of it?
Yeah. Yeah. That's fantastic. boils down to kind of the so what factor, right? What are we even trying to do? Why are we doing this, right? Right. What are we hoping to accomplish? And I'm of the belief that there's usually got to be a really strong answer for that. We're going to disrupt an organization. We're going to spend money. We're going to create some problems. There'll be some mistakes. There'll be some growing pains. There'll be learning errors, right? So why are we doing it? What are we trying to get out the other end? The idea that, hey, everybody's doing it, so should I, is a really terrible way to do, I think, almost anything in life. Technology is no different, right?
Yep.
It's what are you hoping to accomplish here? A great example of this, I think, if we go back to the 90s, late 90s, right? Internet boom is a thing. Everyone's getting on the internet. Well, first, no one was getting on and then everybody said, oh, wow, we're missing out on it. Everyone has to get on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And some types of businesses, right? Very famously, Amazon. Their business model wouldn't have worked in a brick and mortar world. This new realm of technology made possible the way that they're doing business, that they couldn't have done it before. So that's not an incremental advantage. That's actually the birth of an entirely new an entirely new industry, right? This is an exponential advantage for them. Your neighborhood flower store, though, at the same time, becoming internet enabled in 1999, your mom and pop flower shop, probably not a great ROI, right? You look at local brick and mortars, sure, over the next 20 years, we kind of expect there'll be a Yelp page and maybe there'll be Google reviews on them. And maybe we can place an online order at a restaurant through Grubhub or something. But it took 20 some years for that to become a table stakes improvement where it's an incremental advantage over a generation,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to some of these internet first companies. It's an exponential change, right? Their industry couldn't exist without it, or we're talking about 1,000x, 10,000x growth. So I think when we're thinking about technology, and there's a strong argument here around AI as well, right? I think the dynamics are the same. Does everyone need AI? You should really think about it, though. Is it going to be the 10,000x change for you or an interesting talking point?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the first driver, right? Is technology is almost never something that you do just because you don't know what else to do, right? Growth is flat. Let's buy some technology. That's a terrible conversation. Everybody else is doing it. Let's also do it. We don't want to be left behind is frankly a terrible position. If you can't articulate why you'll be left behind, you shouldn't be doing it. And if you can articulate why you'll be left behind, whether it's technology or any other reason, well, you probably should have already done it. Let's go do it, right? So there's nothing I don't think that's different about technology than any of the other levers that we pull in a business. It's not something that you do just because it exists. It's something that you do because you can articulate precisely what that is going to do for your organization that you're not able to do now, or isn't working well, or isn't efficient enough, or a new capability, or whatever that might be.
That's great. You led my next question perfectly with that answer because that's exactly where I was going
Oh,
to go. And of
perfect.
course, you can't have a technology and an
Mm,
organizational cultural discussion without bringing up AI. And that is all the rage, as you know. And I'm sure you run into this daily, if not hourly, with your current role right now and working with
yeah.
all these various companies and governments. But it really comes down to what is that technology going to do for you? So how many, if you had to guess, let's put a swag out there, what percentage of organizations just simply start looking at technology because AI is the biggest thing and it's covered by the media every single day? Or, my competitor now has this fancy new chatbot on their website. We probably should do the same thing. Do you feel like it really comes up from a need of the business, or is the majority of these moves, assuming flatlining is kind of the baseline, meaning they're not really sure how to grow. It comes out of this just wild idea of seeing something and then pursuing
Mhm.
that for the sake of the technology.
Is it a magic bullet, right? Yeah, great question. And there are probably half a dozen lenses that we could look at this through, right? First one would be, I think there's a top-down lens, which is, unless you've been living under a rock, we all hear about AI all day, every news cycle, business news, social news, you name it, right? There's no avoiding this. So you have pressure from executive teams, right? You have pressure from boards, you have pressure from a lot of leaders, and I think rightly so, asking a sensible question, which is, what is our AI strategy? does this make sense to implement? And I think that's the right question, right? Does this make sense to implement?
Yeah.
Do we have a strategy? If we don't, let's think well, think carefully, talk to others, bring in experts, have a conversation, and come up with an understanding supported by evidence, ideally, or not, if that's the way you prefer to do it, about whether we should do something here, right? So I think that's a sensible first step.
Yeah.
I think the dangerous first step is when you're like, well, everyone else is doing it. Clearly, we need fill in the blank, right? Why don't we have an agentic workflow? What do you mean by that? Don't worry about that. We need one, right? Why don't we have, whether it's RAG, whether it's all the great kind of transformer LLM based things? That's dangerous, right? Like we were just alluding to, hopping headfirst out of that drive to not be left behind
Mm.
is probably not a great point to be making decisions from.
Yeah.
Interesting conversation in San Francisco maybe a month ago during Tech Week with some folks from NVIDIA and also a AI consulting company that was working deploying solutions about where they're really seeing benefits, right? Everybody's engaging, everybody's hiring AI consultants right now to build all these huge implementations.
Yeah.
And the actual ROI is largely coming from pharmacy. So things, turns out, transformer models, which is the technology behind what we call LLMs, which often people interact with as chatbots or ChatGPT, belong to that family. The guts of those, if you take those off, are really good at doing things like drug rediscovery, right? So working through pharmacy catalogs and some of that sort of thing.
Mhm.
And also pretty good at logistics. And some of those industries are seeing really huge ROI. A lot of the rest of the folks who are implementing are seeing marginal increases.
Mhm.
Frankly, I think there's a habit of, in down quarters, right, as folks are doing riffs and doing layoffs, you're looking for the reason of the day.
Yep.
Hey, you can implement some AI chatbots and then claim that's why you had to lay off 10,000 people, even though the fundamentals of the company weren't looking well in the first place,
Right.
right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And you see that quite a bit. I actually sent my wife a text message the other day. Somebody on X had posted, here are all the companies that are doing all these layoffs, and they're saying it's not because of AI, but everybody knows it's because of AI. But
Mhm.
I tend to agree with you. I think, I'm thinking about my own personal experiences, the companies that I've run or been a part of. And that's anything from startups to, I used to work for Hewlett Packard or Shell Oil. So,
Right.
14, 10, 12 companies. And it always seemed the hardest part was, one, understanding what you were actually bringing in, because as you have
Uh-huh.
to explain that, it is, you said this best. How can you, if you can't articulate why you need the technology, then it's going to be
Maybe
hard to
you don't.
sell that. Right. Exactly.
Right, right.
And for me, it was always like, here's this benefit of what's going to happen, and this is what we're going to get out of it. Rarely did that ever happen. It was this nice kind of push, and maybe I'm going to use some of my examples from bigger organizations I was a part of. So
Mhm.
let's, Hewlett Packard as an example, global company, 55,000 employees. You're pushing this out to all these people in various work streams, but there was little understanding of what the technology actually did. It was really a top down approach and push. So, moving over to executive leaderships, and when the decision has been made to bring in technology into the organization, how important is it for leadership to maybe market the idea a little bit better, be able to answer all those questions, sell it really well? Let's use Steve Jobs as maybe the pedestal of, Steve Jobs could
Yeah,
sell
yeah.
anything to anybody and it was all technology related. He kept it very simple, versus getting down to maybe managers that are actually forcing the implementation to people and how that breaks down. So how does the dichotomy of that leadership and those explanations make a significant difference for the culture of that organization?
Yeah, yeah, great question. And I think it comes back to, as you were kind of alluding to, right? That it's one of the fundamentals of leadership, is being able to say, you know what? We think that our organization needs to take a turn in this direction or this other direction, and we need people to be on board. But unless you're Steve Jobs, and I think most folks aren't Steve Jobs at the end of the day, it really helps to understand why we're going to make a decision in an organization. I think there are a lot of organizations in which there's some deep-rooted questions around why we made the decision, and often that understanding of specifically why we made this technology decision isn't well supported among the different levels. Maybe it made sense to somebody at some level, or, frankly, been part of groups where someone on the board that belongs to the private equity firm that owns a majority share of the company also is involved with another company whose product they'd like to drive into this company, right? And that's why the decision happens. So those things happen and they happen very, very often, right? So how do you maintain kind of that legitimacy from a technology leadership perspective while driving these directions?
Mhm.
And I think one of them, right, is probably the clarity around outcomes and capabilities. But the second part, it's back to the human thing, right? When you think about in almost any company, if you've been bought, if you've been sold, if you're doing something, most folks' first question is not, oh my God, what's that going to do to stock prices? What's this going to do to our branding? Their first question is, what's it mean for me? That's where people are is what does this mean for me? Am I losing my job? Or, is it changing where I'm working, how I'm working, all this other stuff. So I think those fundamentals of getting people behind you when you're leading change are bread and butter for this type of change as well, right? Where are we going? Can we
Mhm.
articulate why we're going there? Can we articulate what it means for the folks who will be coming with us?
Mhm.
And as we know, a lot of times in a lot of management styles, the unvarnished truth, and maybe that's my preference too, I think that is showing through as well, clearly often carries better than the varnished truth, right? It's we're doing this. We're taking a left hand turn. This business isn't working so well. We're exploring in this direction. We're buying this technology because we want to evolve this new capability, and this other one's just not cutting it for us, right?
Yeah.
So I think being able to boil down the complexity that's inherent in those conversations, how it intersects with the company's operation, with financials, with the human facets, with the human operation, with the technology operation. Can we get this down to, the elevator pitch? Can you explain it to a stranger on the bus? I think that really helps sell it through an organization that we
Mhm.
don't get tripped up by a thousand little details about, well, it does this and it does this and it does this and we're losing this and doing this other thing. What are the big point, right? One, two, 3 points.
Yeah.
Why are we doing it?
Yeah. That's great. And you just reminded me of, the famous Warren Buffett quote, which I love, which is like, if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, then you don't
Right.
know it well enough. And maybe I think I might be jaded from that in some of my previous careers. I feel
Yep.
I like your point about the varnished versus unvarnished, and especially with AI. We're entering this new frontier where it feels like you almost can't trust anything. And, just going back to that screenshot that I mentioned I had sent to my wife, what was interesting is you look back, look at what happened with Salesforce earlier this year. I think they laid off 6,500 people and they said it had nothing to do with AI, right? It's just,
Hmm.
um, market changes. You look at UPS and it's like, we just lobbied to have, these massive hiring expenditures and raises for the culture, and then now you laid off 48,000 people. You're looking at videos or pictures, and people can't tell if it's AI generated or not. And there
Hmm.
seems to be a
Hmm.
lot of mistrust or distrust in the marketplace, whether that's in an organization or external. How do you prep your leaders to be able to handle maybe that pushback or those obstacles as they're trying to roll out new technology?
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. And kind of the heart of the matter, right? Not a short question, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I think it's coming back to the simplification part, right? So often, by the time I'm speaking with an organization, they've tried doing things that haven't worked well, right? So we've already incurred kind of this change penalty, if you will. We've got a change budget among people. We've already been spending against that change budget. People have been disrupted. Their worlds have been changed. So one of the first tasks is often getting a little bit of goodwill back, right? We've often spent the goodwill. So
Yeah.
rough time to walk in the doors and go, golly, well, where do we go from here, right? So I like to focus on small wins, small
Mhm.
incremental wins first, right? These big bombastic projects often don't work well. Those are great for governments to execute. If we're sending a spaceship to the moon, having some huge multi-year project is a fantastic thing. Building an aircraft carrier, you need to do an awful lot of planning to get things in the right place.
That's right.
But most of us aren't building nuclear aircraft carriers, right? Most of us are actually doing very simple little things.
Right.
So often bring an organization back to a practice of small incremental wins, because if we can get a small win quickly without disrupting people's life, right, it helps rebuild that faith in, "Oh, we can execute and we can change. And that wasn't so bad, right? It's like going to the gym. If you haven't gone to the gym in 10 years, going to the gym is I think a pretty big lift for folks, no pun intended. But if it's something that you do every day, we build the muscle memory, it's not so scary, it's not so bad, and we learn how to handle everything. It's really, I think, really similar. How do we prioritize? How do we get really simple on what we're trying to accomplish and start locking in some very small wins?
Hmm.
This gives some of the goodwill again for the management team, for the change team, for leadership, for the employees to feel good about we're making progress. We're capable of doing that. We can do this,
Mm.
right? And then start trying to get some bigger wins, maybe do one thing the first quarter after a failed experience, right? Then we worry about doing 2 and 3, but let's not have 27 on our project plan
Yeah.
the first
Yeah.
quarter.
That's great. I mean, it remind me of, tiger teams, pilot
Mhm,
projects. We're going to take the technology. We're going to try it for this one workflow over here. We're really going to dial
mhm,
that and bring the
mhm.
results back versus here's the massive organization that we're going to push it out to, not knowing the issues that are going to come from it. But let's for a second flip this and go move from the leadership to people that are actually doing the implementation and seeing the results. So not less of the C suites and maybe even higher up in the management, but hey, here's an individual contributor. Here are everyday workers that are dealing with this technology. At Habitual Growth, our main push is that mental transformation. It's getting people to push
Mhm.
outside of their comfort zones, to learn new skill sets, to learn new habits. I know you are big on the personal development space as well. What can individual contributors or people that feel that, hey, I don't really have a say or a voice in what's being, pushed down or implemented into the organization, what can and should they be doing at this day and age with the push of AI or any technology that comes into their organization?
Yeah, great question. Simplify. I think at the end of the day, right? Back to even as an individual contributor in the organization, we have this eternal generational views are changing. Are you going to be with this company for the next 37 years? Are you going to be there for the next 37 days, next 12 months, right? Whatever that might be. But what's the priority? While you're there, right? Especially if there's a wave of change coming, and there always is, right? When we're past this AI hump, which I suspect will flatten out a little bit, and it'll be back in a different incarnation before too long, in a different incarnation before too long, right? I think there's wisdom in the idea that it's really hard for us to predict what'll happen in the next 1 to 3 years, but we tend
Mhm.
to underestimate how much change there'll be in the next 8 to 10 years. So it's going to change and it's going to change quickly. And in 10 years, the world will look entirely different. That's
Yeah.
probably the case. Simplify. Is there a corner of it that you can become an expert on? As a technology person, for example, or as a business person who's adjacent to technology, there are 27 acronyms that you probably heard in the last week about AI.
Yep.
What do they mean? Right? Even as a non-technologist, learning about what are we actually talking about, right? The why of it. Reminded of there's a book, a biography of Richard Feynman, the physicist, and he talks about walking in a park with his father and looking at birds and being like, what's the name of that bird? And what's the name of that bird? And what's the name of that bird? And his father told him, it's like, don't worry about the names of the birds, worry about the nature of the bird. How does the bird fly? How does it behave? What's its song? The names are different in every language, right?
Yeah.
You'll learn the name, but learn the nature behind the name. Same with AI. It's
Yeah.
when somebody's talking about agentic workflows, they might be talking about a meaningful business process and they might just be regurgitating some buzzwords. So pick something, focus on it, and then maybe dig behind it a little bit to actually learn what is it? What capability are we talking about? Well, what does the thing do?
Mhm.
Just because it's AI doesn't mean that it's immune from all the other things that we've cared about for the last bazillion years of human existence, which is there's energy or cost that goes in, there's some benefit that comes out. Is it worth it? How does it interact in the universe? They have the same properties, right?
Yeah.
So simplify, focus, and I would suggest find one of those things and become an expert on it,
Mm.
and then find the second one and become an expert on it, right? Just like you eat the elephant, one bite at a time, right? It's
Yeah.
overwhelming otherwise.
Yeah. Well, I have to just pause you, Alex, because
Mhm.
I know you're in the tech realm. I did not know that you were spying on my phone because the Richard Feynman example you just gave, I discovered that literally this morning and watched
Really?
that clip. Yes. And so I'd never heard it before. It's amazing that you actually just brought that up. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
And it makes sense. And I love that example because, yes, you're right. In that, he basically said, the way that he articulated was, his friends were making fun of him because his dad didn't teach him, the name of a bird. And he basically said, well, that was the opposite because my dad told me the name of the bird in like 7 different languages. And he said, well, you know how to say the bird's name, but you know nothing about the bird. You
Uh-huh.
don't
Uh-huh.
know what it eats, where it comes from, migratory
Mhm.
patterns, all this stuff. And so I think that's a perfect analogy. So if anybody
Yeah.
hasn't seen that, you should go look that up. It's very, very self-explanatory once you watch it. But that is real, and that's something that even
Yeah.
I try to do. I'm creeping my way into the AI space right now, but it's the same with any technology. And I would argue communication is a big one, but also almost as a skill set, just openness. Stop being adverse to looking silly or pretending like you know everything. Almost put your ego away and say, hey, I want to volunteer for this team. I'm interested in learning more about this technology. How can I help? What research can I do? And I think most managers would really be open to something
Uh-huh.
like that, especially if people take 15, 20 minutes, even during their work time, to go research a little bit to see how things are actually progressing and peel yourself away. And that really embodies, I think, just growth mindset at a basic level. Being open to it, saying, hey, we need more people in our company to really understand this. We are still the humans. We have to be the liaisons between the people and the technology. And if you can do that for yourself, you're going to really almost help your career at an accelerated rate because technology isn't going to slow down. And if you can stay on the innovation front and the cutting edge trends of what's coming down the pipeline, it doesn't mean you have to know everything about them, but just have a basic understanding, learn the fundamentals, like you're saying. I think that can go so far for the organization, but more importantly, for people learning new skill sets, new habits, new mental thought processes. And that to me really represents what I think most people want to understand, right? You hear something, but you don't know what it means. How can I dive in a little bit more, baby step maybe my way so that I have this understanding? I can contribute a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. The growth mindset example is perfect. When I used to interview a lot of people, the two things that I would be looking for were passion, some kind of passion in the universe. I don't care about what. I don't
Yeah.
even care if it's about the technology we're talking about. You'll learn that, right? And then to that point, 2 years from now, it'll be a new one. 2 years from then, it'll be a new one. Like, who cares if you know the toolkit of the day? Are you passionate enough about something? Like maybe it's fly fishing,
Yeah.
right? Just convince me that you're a passionate, engaged human being and leave me feeling a little dumb, right? Like
Mm,
those are the things that I loved as a hiring manager. It's like, oh wow, I feel a little dumb, and this guy's passion is kind of making me feel dull. That's a fantastic starting point. But yeah, to that point, if you have a strong or a good management team being like, hey, I know nothing about this, but you know what? I'm fired up and ready to dive in and figure it out. Like
mhm.
people be throwing their hands up in the air and celebrating you. That's this amazing thing
Yeah.
as opposed to the negativity effect or the wet blanket effect or this the fear and the impermanence and the change and the oh my god it's all going to go and drift by and change out from under us. That's a rough way to go through life, frankly, because we're going to go through who knows how many of those changes in the next 25, 35 years, right? During our lifespans, 40 years, 50 years, let's say we live another 100 years, right? It's going to happen a bunch of times.
Yeah. Do you see more of leadership being fearful, or is it more of individual contributors, maybe different levels of the organization being fearful because they don't have all of the information? Where does that fear really take place when it comes to understanding, but also adoption?
Yes. Yes. I think that's one of the things that when you walk into a new organization is your first task to figure out. Some organizations seem to be very change avoidant and fearful as a whole, maybe industries that haven't moved quickly. And sometimes it's the leadership team that's fearful and the employees are ready to surge forward and the leadership team's like, oh, we don't understand this, let's not do it. And sometimes it's the other way around, right? They brought in some fresh new leadership team and it's the employee bodies that are like, oh golly. It does seem, right, that over time in terms of building that culture, that what happens at the top seems to trickle down. I think the literature supports that. People hire people who think similarly, et cetera, et cetera. If we've got, let's call it positive aggression, right? The risk-taking aggression of, I want to go take some chances and not too many because we have a business to run, but some, right? Small, careful bets. People tend to hire people who do that, who tend to hire people who do that. And, you fast forward a decade, you have an organization that embodies that kind of culture.
Hmm.
Conversely, I think, yeah, if you do have a lot of this fear embedded in leadership teams or fear embedded in pockets of the organization, it's contagious through the same mechanism. Not only witnessed, and modeled for people within those organizations, but they might tend to hire people who have similar embodiments, or maybe people just become like those around them, right? But
Yeah.
there does seem to be a contagion factor involved.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's shift over to governments. Let's go to the
Mhm.
biggest organizations that there are, right? It's kind of like running a country, basically. And I know you do a little bit of work here, whatever you're able to share with us, but how are governments, specifically the ones you are working with, actually, learning about technology, advancing what technology can do for their country, their people, because this is obviously the other aspect of what people feel. It's professional life, and then it's, what are the regulations, the requirements, et
Mhm.
cetera, that the governments put down on people that they have to deal with as well. So how are governments approaching technological advances?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, right? I think one of the broad differences, if we look at the European Union just passed an AI framework recently, a regulatory framework, and their approach is entirely different than the US's, which
Hmm.
is not surprising, right? The joke has always been the US innovates, Europe regulates, and there's some truth to this, right? On one hand, we do have a lot of the AI companies here are probably running a little bit afoul of copyright law, right? They're training their LLMs on stuff they don't have rights to.
Yep.
And this is kind of this, it's not even an open secret anymore. It's an open truth, but we're not doing a whole lot about it. Comma, the cat's out of the bag. You can't put that cat back in the bag. And there's not that much more material to train on. So we're not going to do that much more net damage by doing it. Seems to be our regulatory approach, right?
Hmm.
Europeans are taking very different views, right? They tend to respect IP laws more. They seem to be more interested in regulating how AI can be used in decision-making processes. So if
Hmm.
you're using AI to decide who can get an educational opportunity, an employment opportunity, contracts, there's some other caveats in there too, but they want a lot more caution about that process that they're building in from day one.
Hmm.
And I think this manifests in two really interesting ways, right? We don't have to look very far to see the heads of one of our big AI companies on the news talking about AGI, right?
Yep.
General intelligence, when we'll just have this super intelligence that takes over the world. And a lot of the naysayers saying, well, that's the point of inflection. That's the singularity. There's no coming back from that, right? We're going to be off at sci-fi land and all this horrible stuff happens. Other people are saying maybe that's actually still 20, 30, 50 years away, right? It's not going to be tomorrow.
Hmm.
And I think we don't find out until it happens. Right.
Yep.
So let's check back in 5 years and see if we're mining rocks on Mars. But the European view is a result of that regulatory framework. The way companies are building AI is far more focused, where our big stage AI work is on these superhuman intelligences that can solve and do all things, right?
Hmm.
Europeans are focused, and in fact, the Chinese also more on niche built technology. So they're saying, let's not do some super AI that will solve all of superhuman intelligence. Let's
Hmm.
focus on medical diagnoses or radiology or protein folding or some pharmacy work or medical work or net scientific or materials science or pick the niche, right?
Yep. Yep.
But they're taking the effort, and because of these frameworks that would make it far harder for them to do this whole AGI thing, plus a lack of capital, and it's a different environment, and I think there's a lot of other things that feed into it, is that regulatory footprint that the government's put down is resulting in very different products available in the market for companies to use, for people to use.
Yeah.
So, and that we might wind up going that way as well, as these AGI efforts become bigger and more expensive and more power consumptive, and people aren't getting the ROI on them.
Mm.
When do we come back to kind of these small purpose built technology models? So that's probably the first one, right? Is how that regulatory footprint shapes what's
Yeah.
happening in the market, which is super interesting. And then the role of government adoption it as well. So the EU is doing a lot of support, building their own data centers and inviting and cooperating with university partners to build this sort of pan European Union footprint. It's a very sort of European thing to do. They'll generally band their resources together to one common
Yeah.
end. And we're doing kind of that untethered free market experiment about what happens if we just put all the throttles all the way forward
Yeah.
and see what the outcome of this thing is, right? Maybe we extinguish mankind, and maybe we have a super intelligence that solves all problems in the universe. and maybe everyone just runs out of capital in 5 years.
Yeah, that's a loaded question, and that's something,
Yeah.
again, I'd like just your personal opinion on, because I'm fascinated by truly what I just call the AI race, and it's that. It's like everybody has the countries of note, so China, India, US, UK, right? You kind of look at the big players, and it
Uh-huh.
seems like everybody has just jammed the throttle forward. We're going as fast as we can. You look at regulation for AI in the US, and I think what isn't it? We can't regulate it for another 10 years type thing, and how fast AI is evolving. People have pretty much said, well, it's going to be the wild,
It's
wild west.
non-existent. Yeah.
Yeah. So how does that, in a world where, let's just use my political algorithms and how they've kind of fed
Uh-huh.
me information. I don't know if any of this is true, but the UK, you're talking about regulation. I think that's really true. They're tying in
Uh-huh.
digital ID, they're tying in bank
Uh-huh.
accounts and carbon footprints and these things. And then you move over to China, and it's like China has no regulations. They're training it on everything, all the data, and it's all about the data, data, data. The US has come out now and said, well, if China's doing it, we have to beat them to the AI race because it's going to be too detrimental to national security and things like that. What are your thoughts, just one, about the AI race in general? I know that's a broad question, but then two, how can we as humans, let's bring it back to the human element, how can we as humans focus on the personal development to be okay with things that we can't control? Because I think the
Yeah.
mental
Yeah.
capabilities of people is so important when it comes to technological advances, specifically things that we don't have an understanding of or we can't control.
Yeah, great question. I think the parallels in here to the space race, right? The average
Yes,
American
exactly.
wasn't sending rockets to the moon, but everyone was tuning into TV to see, oh, did we beat the Soviets today or
Yeah,
this week
that's
or
right.
this
That's
month
right.
or
Yeah.
whatever, right? And largely out of the hands of individuals who I think felt very, very powerless by it. So, yeah, I think there is this component of it's maybe this generation's version of the nuclear threat, although there is a nuclear threat woven into some of this stuff as well. Of yeah, what happens at the end of the day? My personal feeling is that the track we are currently on uh, is going to burn out. Is that the economics don't really work, right? The what it costs to train the next version of GPT, is staggering. No one really knows exactly what, but hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe $1 billion. I don't know,
Mhm.
right? Massive amount of money. And us asking ChatGPT for a casserole recipe, based on something we found in Endo's cabinet might cost $500 at the end of the day for all we know, right? Once all this money is settled out. And the hope is, right, that we'll get over a hump and there'll be this magic pot of gold on the other side of the hump that we're just burning all this cash in a really unprofitable space. So I hope that at some point before too long, this current trajectory becomes unprofitable enough that we come back off the throttle and do some other things, right? That the full on race, we're like, you know what? We're not actually getting it. We're burning a huge amount of money,
Mhm.
sucking up all the GPUs, burning a huge amount of electricity, building all these data centers. We aren't getting anywhere. Let's pull back a little, make a left turn, right turn, some other
Yeah.
turn. I think that's a really likely outcome, right? That there's some other technology we need to do. We need to pivot to the left, to the right. We need to use analog chips. We need to reinforce, going back to reinforcement learning is a really popular idea right now, right? Tesla's been doing that with their humanoid robots, more of we turn the machine loose into the world to learn from the world as a human learns from the world and
Yep.
not we do this really expensive training that we're doing right now. So there's a lot of other things that could happen in terms of that next step. So I think the race is going to peter out. I hope, let me rephrase that. I hope the race is going to peter out and that the tack that we're going on is unprofitable. We pull back and we start doing some more targeted uses of
Mhm.
let's figure out where to get actual benefit to society or to a business or to a human other than having a really clever chatbot that can write your term papers for you so that you can, be worse at writing when you graduate from
Right.
college today. I don't think that's of net benefit to humanity, but the kind of the individual side. Well, so I think the mega race, this is just the first sprint, right?
Right.
We hit a wall. I think we back off and then we're like, well, we're going to go to the left now. And then we're going to go to the right. And maybe the analog is There was the post-World War, there was the World War II nuclear race. Then there was the post-World War II nuclear race. Then there was the hydrogen bomb race. Then there was the ICBM race. Then it's more of a power projection race. And there was actually, the Cold War wound up being 6 or 8 or 10 sub races over time that ultimately turned into an economics contest. And that's what won at the end of the day was, moving produce around the Soviet Union was really ineffective. I think that's kind of the direction we'll go. This isn't the end chapter. This is the first chapter. So I think the idea is we just hold on. It'll be fine. We'll get to chapter 2. We'll get to chapter 3. We'll get to chapter 4, chapter 5, chapter 6. It'll be okay. Because if it goes sideways, it's not nearly as catastrophic as a hydrogen bomb and ICBM based race going catastrophically, right? It's not awesome, but it's not as bad as a generation or two ago had it in this type of situation. So yeah, coming back to that uncertainty part, I think, and let me rephrase that as I'm a bit disappointed by the lack of broadly trustworthy public voices, right? Whether they're governmental voices, and I know our trusts in these institutions are not what they used to be, whether it's media voices, right? Whether it's the social media sphere is full of so much untrustworthy stuff that it's hard to pick out, what's really going on there. A tech-centric Walter Cronkite, to have a fireside chat with everybody and be like, hey, here's what could happen, and here's what could happen, and here's what could happen. But, let's go on, folks, channel some Winston Churchill in there too while we're at it. Of, here's our hope for tomorrow. There's faith in tomorrow. This is not the end of the world. This is just the first chapter. Humans are still alive. There's going to be chapter 2. There's going to be chapter 3. There's going to be chapter 4. So simplify, focus, and get on with it.
Yeah, and that's great, and I think that's the perfect transition to get back to, how can or should people, just general people, they don't have to be a leader, they don't have to be in government, but how can they and should they be approaching technology in this day and age? And I'm just going to preface this by saying, I'm a big believer in the human element. That's why we do habitual growth. Technology is always going to be there. And like you said, if you look back at history, it was, the different world wars, and that, wasn't great, but we got through it. There was the potential nuclear war. We're kind of working through that now.
Right. I'm still here. Are you still there?
Okay. Well, I'm going to have to repeat.
Yeah, I see you fine. See you, hear you fine.
Okay. My computer seems to be doing something. It's getting close.
Now mine's still, now you've gone. All right.
That was on. I'm sorry about that. No, did not have that happen before.
Things happen.
They do. All right. if you can hear me okay, I can hear and see you okay. I'm just going to reboot that question because we're rounding out anyways. This is recording. I'll just have my team started out at this question here. But so really kind of going back, that was a perfect answer. And what we try to do here on this podcast is really give people some takeaways that are actionable. How can they start to prepare themselves mentally, personally, and with the amount of information that's out there, as we look back on history, we've made it through all these different technological advances, as you've already mentioned. What can and should be people doing right now to invest in themselves? How can they be transforming their mindsets and maybe even their skill sets to better be adaptable or even help adopt technology into their organizations in the future?
Yeah, great question. So personally, I'm going to share a couple of things that I do or ways that I think about the world, right? Which is expectation management is sort of my fundamental lever that I use when we're looking at these. Do I have an expectation about how things are going to turn out? Or is it more of an expectation about I'm going to enjoy the ride no matter what happens, right? So an attachment to a particular outcome, we don't know the outcomes, right? So I think detaching from the outcome and in signing on for the ride is a really important thing. Additionally, there was a great story that I loved about Admiral Stockdale, right? Who in the 90s was part of the presidential contest. He was running as vice president, and he was a prisoner of war in Vietnam. And one of the things that he noticed was that the POWs who had unrealistic expectations of getting rescued tomorrow, of things will be better, the war will be over in 6 hours, they were the ones who didn't make it. The ones who had a very realistic framing of the environment they're in were actually better equipped. So it's kind of this dichotomy of optimism is a great way to meet the way that we interact with our journey. But I find that optimism as attachment to a particular outcome can readily undermine my confidence in the ability to navigate the world in one that's changing quickly. Like we said, with these AI tools, if you invest all your time and effort into learning one particular tool and one particular way of doing something, well, that might be gone in a year and we'll be on to something else, right? So stay nimble, not be attached to the outcome. Have some faith that this is chapter one. And after this, there'll be chapter 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But one of the best things we can do is be ready to pivot when it's time to pivot. When we have evidence that what we're doing isn't working, don't hold on to it. Take a left turn, take a right turn. Sunk cost fallacy is a real thing. Just because we've spent years or a huge part of our savings pursuing a certain direction doesn't mean that it's not time to do something else when it's time to do that.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for sharing that, because honestly,
Yeah.
that's a bit of a relief to hear versus the doom and the gloom that I think you see in a lot of the media stuff and talking heads that are out there. Because I agree, it's getting very hard to decipher what's real, who's
Mhm.
in charge, what do we have control over. And me being an entrepreneur in my
Mhm.
industry, but not even in the industry, just in startup world, it's this huge push of like, hey, you're going to get left behind if you don't adopt all this technology. And as you mentioned, that's not the right frame of mind. It's what is actually going to move you personally forward and your business
Right,
forward,
right.
build your culture to support the technology if and when the time is right to bring it into to your organization.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, that said, Alex, this has been awesome. So thank you for your time. I love speaking to you. I've learned an incredible amount. How can people find you if they want to get in touch with you, follow you, even, hire you for some consulting work on technology?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for your time, Nathan. I've enjoyed the conversation. So you can find me at alex@pangeas.io email and check out articles and some other things we have available on the website. And that's a great place to contact and reach out for consulting help if you need help navigating technology world, organizational change around it, or anything of that nature.
You're the guy to go to for sure. So
There
this
we
is
go.
all. Thank you again, Alex. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to connecting you again soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right, we'll talk soon. Bye.
All right. Bye bye.